All right, well, thank you. Nice to see you all. I have to say, this is one of my favorite conferences. There's always so much interesting information. The last talk I thought was really fascinating. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Jepson Prairie. A little background on this. I did my undergraduate research up in Southern Oregon at Southern Oregon University. And I was first introduced to vernal pools at a little less than 100-acre vernal pool preserve that's outside of a city called White City. It's sort of east of Medford along the Rogue River there. And fell in love with vernal pools and vernal pool ecosystems. And while I was there in Ashland, a lot of people kept saying, oh, you gotta go down to Jepson Prairie. It's amazing. If you like vernal pools, that's the place to go. Well, as it would happen, I ended up doing my graduate work at University of California, Davis, and Jepson happened to be essentially in my backyard, and was really fortunate to get to know Jepson Prairie. And after I graduated with my master's degree at Davis, I ended up working in Sacramento as a consulting biologist and had an opportunity to become involved as a docent at Jepson Prairie, and that was quite some time ago. And so this is kind of a place that's very near and dear to my heart, and something I really thought would be worth highlighting in what I thought was going to be a very quick talk, and now it's going to turn into a little bit longer talk here. But I have no problem talking for 15 minutes about Jepson Prairie. A little history about how this came about. Back in the 1970s, I think nationally, a lot of conservationists and ecologists and scientists were recognizing that there had been a tremendous loss of wetland habitats, in particular in the United States. And in California, there was an alarm bells going off about the loss of vernal pool habitat in the state. And I'm sure many of you in the room are aware of some of the work that people like Dr. Bob Holland have done looking at the historic distribution of vernal pools and the loss of that landscape over time as a result of agricultural conversion and urban development. And the fact is that now there's so little of this natural habitat remaining in the state that there was really a priority in the late 70s on identifying and preserving sort of these really critical areas of vernal pool habitat. And so in 1980, the Nature Conservancy purchased 1,566 acres in Solano County of this vernal pool landscape that contained a very large playa lake, Olcott Lake over here, and the adjacent surrounding habitat that supported vernal pools and prairie and purple needlegrass grassland and whatnot. This is one of actually several preserves that the Nature Conservancy purchased. The preserve I worked on in Southern Oregon is a Nature Conservancy preserve. Many of you are probably familiar with Mina Plains in this area, which is also a TNC preserve. So they were really one of the first organizations that started this process of protecting and preserving these vernal pool landscapes in California. So just to put it in geographic context, Dixon, California is right here. It's about 10 miles south on the east side of Fairfield. Sacramento is up in this area. It was named in honor of Willis Lynn Jepson, who is one of the first. There's so many things in California that are named after Jepson because he was such a prominent botanist in this area. But it was named in honor of Jepson. The preserve was eventually transferred in the 1980s, late 80s, over to Solano Land Trust. And they are now the organization that owns and manages the land that Jepson Prairie sits on. What's really unique and great about this system is that it's actually today now part of a larger 6,000 plus acre vernal pool preserve ecosystem. So Jepson Prairie is over here. It's surrounded on either side by lands that are owned and managed by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Solano Land Trust also owns a large portion of the Wilcox Ranch, which is another large vernal pool preserve. And then Solano County owns the other half of Wilcox Ranch, between basically Highway 113 and Travis Air Force Base over here on the west side. I would also want to note that as part of this whole landscape, in the 1990s, Carol Witham developed a regional management plan for looking at managing the ecology and the landscape of these vernal pools, sort of in the context of the regional landscape and the land use of those areas. So it's got a sort of a plan for managing these as sort of an ecosystem-wide, a large landscape level conservation plan. Jepson Prairie, one of the reasons it was acquired and preserved is because it's really one of the best remaining examples that we have of this, what we call the northern clay pan vernal pool landscape in this nealgrass prairie. And it's really a fantastic place in terms of its ecological and biological diversity. And as you can see, just fantastic in the spring, and this year with all this rain, it should look something like this. It just has these spectacular floral displays in the springtime. But it's also, like many vernal pool habitats, it's unique throughout the year, where there's very interesting things going on in the wintertime when you don't have these floristic displays, and you go out there in the late summer and you see all these really weird late season plants that are either really prickly or really sticky or really smelly, and it's just a really interesting landscape at any time of the year, but it's the really showiest sort of, it really highlights this prairie ecosystem in the spring. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the biological diversity that we have on the preserve. We know of at least nearly 400 species of vascular plants that are found on the preserve, including a number of rare, threatened, and endangered species that are found on Jepson Prairie. This is one of them here. This is gradiola, which is one of the rare plants on the preserve. There's over 130 bird species that use the preserve. Olcott Lake is a particularly important stopping ground for birds on the migratory pathway, the Pacific Flyway, stopping and feeding in the vernal pools, and particularly Olcott Lake. It's got 16 species of reptiles and amphibians, including the California tiger salamander, which I'll talk a little bit more about later in the talk here. And it's got a number of the rare vernal pool invertebrates. The interesting thing here, Conservancy fairy shrimp, Olcott Lake, that large playa pool that's found, is actually the type locality of Conservancy fairy shrimp. And when it was described to science, it was named, the scientific name, Branchionecta conservatio, was named in honor of the Nature Conservancy, who actually protected and preserved its type locality habitat. It's also got vernal pool fairy shrimp, vernal pool fairy shrimp here, vernal pool tadpole shrimp over here. The preserve also supports mid-valley fairy shrimp, which some people believe is equally as rare, if not more rare, although not listed as vernal pool fairy shrimp. Some other really cool cryptic invertebrates, also rare and endangered, that are associated with the Jepson Prairie Preserve are the Delta green ground beetle, which inhabits this sort of marginal area along the rim and edge of Olcott Lake. I've been a docent out at Jepson Prairie for over 17 years, and I have yet to ever see this species live. I guess I just don't have the patience and the observations, but it's very cryptic and very hard to find. My goal is someday I'm going to actually see this thing in the wild. One of the really interesting things about Jepson Prairie too is, I've mentioned just how incredibly diverse and it is ecologically and important. And this was actually recognized by the National Park Service, as Jepson Prairie is actually an official national natural landmark, which is a designation that's been given to sites that are well preserved and contain outstanding biological and geological resources and are exemplary in terms of rarity, diversity, and value to science and education. And this is certainly the case of Jepson Prairie, and is quite a nice distinction from the National Park Service. So I want to talk a little bit about the education and research component of it. The other thing that happened early on, once the Nature Conservancy purchased the property, is they realized that one of the reasons it had been identified as a high priority area is because research had been going on at the preserve for quite some time before it had actually been protected. Going back to the early 1950s, where some of the vernal pool bear grasses were first identified and described on the preserve. And so as part of the management, the Nature Conservancy established a cooperative agreement with the University of California to manage Jepson Prairie as part of the natural reserve system. So today, even though the land is owned and managed by Solano Land Trust, the management of the preserve is actually done jointly with the UC Natural Reserve System. And so it's sort of a jointly, Solano Land Trust manages sort of the land and deals with sort of the actual land management, whereas the University of California Natural Reserve System deals with sort of the research and education component. And it's very much a cooperative agreement between these two agencies, or two entities. there's just a tremendous amount of research that's been happening there, a lot of work from graduate students from all over the state of California, looking at things like plant genetic diversity and vernal pool ecology and invasive plants in vernal pools and other pollination studies and California tiger salamanders. And I'm going to highlight just a few of those things. I wish I had time to go into all of these different types of research, but some of the ones that I thought were particularly interesting and that I had intended to sort of highlight in the lightning talk were some of the work that Dr. Robin Thorpe has done at the University of California, looking at the interaction of solitary bees and his graduate students looking at the pollinator interactions between vernal pool plants. And he's described a number of these solitary bees from Jepson Prairie. These bees are really interesting in that, unlike a lot of the bees and the wasps that we just heard about, they don't live in hives. The females, who are particular, they collect pollen from a particular type of plant only. They're very specific to collecting pollen only. This particular species collects pollen only from Glenasperma. Other species collect pollen only from Lasthenia or other vernal pool plants. And what these females do is then they go up into the adjacent uplands of the vernal pool landscape, and they'll excavate a burrow into the ground, and they'll excavate 2 or 3 little brood chambers where they'll create a pollen ball and lay their eggs on those pollen balls, and then seal up the hole and wait for the spring when the plants emerge and the larvae emerge. So these bees are called solitary because they each live in these individual little holes, and they're very specific to the vernal pool plants. And one of Robin's graduate students looked at the sort of the interaction between these solitary bees and the vernal pool pollinators, and one of the things that really showed in this research is the importance of that interaction between having these native pollinators in the adjacent uplands and the vernal pool habitat. And in doing vernal pool restoration early on, a lot of the restoration was focused on the wetland habitat and sort of ignoring the importance of these adjacent uplands. And the research has really shown that that's a critical to the success of these vernal pool systems. There's also been a tremendous amount of work that's been done on California tiger salamanders at the preserve, also out of UC Davis. Dr. Brad Schaefer, his group, has done a lot of work. A lot of what we know about the life history of the California tiger salamander has come out of work that's been done at Jepson Prairie. And part of the reason for that is because it's got one of the largest and healthiest populations of this species that we know of. And so it's a great resource facility or resource for looking at this particular species. Moving on, I just want to talk a little bit about the public outreach side of Jepson Prairie and the docent program, which began very early on in the 1980s. It was started basically to introduce the public to this incredible resource in their backyard, basically. And 2 people that I just had wanted to highlight are both Carol Witham, who has developed I believe this is the 3rd edition of the Jepson Prairie Handbook, this incredible resource that talks about the natural history, the cultural history, the soils, the geology of the preserve. And then also Kate Maudsley, who for years, she was the person who got me into the program and is still managing and running the docent program. And I just wanted to mention that as this docent program really brings in spectacular resources like Robin Thorpe and Dr. Bob Holland and C.J. Addington, who's just an expert in vernal pool invertebrates, to really educate the docents about the history and the ecology of the preserve, so that we really give the public a very good basis of understanding of the system. And we have over 50 volunteer docents that are at the preserve. Just in wrapping up, one of the things that Kate has said is that public awareness of vernal pools has surged with news of threats to other vernal pools in the area in the lower Sacramento Valley. And Jepson Prairie is a location where interested people can satisfy their curiosity and learn more about vernal pools and their imperiled populations. And I think this is the whole goal of the Jepson Docent program, and it's something that I'm really very proud to be a part of, and something that I think has certainly enriched my life. And so in ending, I just want to invite you all. We do public tours out there from basically mid-February through Mother's Day, and Saturday and Sunday, so come on out and you can check out the amazing flora of Jepson Prairie. So thank you very much.